Hi everyone. Today's episode is sure to keep you looking over your shoulder for quite some time. First off, a park ranger on a routine patrol in Joshua Tree National Park comes across something they've never seen before in the middle of the road. And then, off to Michigan, where a husband and wife see something in a national forest that makes them change the way they spend their time outdoors. So grab your drink of choice and click those buttons so we can always be together. Great. Now let's get into the stories. I'm guessing that what I experienced has to do with the fact that humans have occupied this area for at least 5,000 years. At least that's the only explanation I can come up with. The humans had something to do with this. I work in Joshua Tree National Park as a park ranger, and what happened to me happened at about 9 o'clock at night while patrolling on my own. I was driving on a dirt road off of Keysview Road, which is about 6 miles from the main part of the park. The area where I was is very remote, and there's no real structure for miles in any direction. There are only Joshua trees and trails and lots of open space with cactus everywhere. I was doing a routine patrol of the park at night because we have had some vandalism and theft in this area. I was driving slowly down the road, which of course has no streetlights or anything like that. The moon was out, but not very bright. There are no other sources of light out there. So as I'm driving along, my headlights hit something big and white on the side of the road, up ahead about 50 feet. At first I thought it might be an elk or deer carcass that had been out for a while, but then I realized that what I saw was way too big to be any kind of animal carcass. It looked like somebody had placed a huge white tablecloth on the ground and wrapped something up in it. I approached slowly because I thought it might be some kind of a prank or something. Or at least something I needed to be attentive to anyway. As I got closer, I realized that this thing was huge. I'd say the best way to describe it would be that it looked like a sheet draped over a very large mass. And then what happened next happened so fast that it's hard to put into words what actually exactly happened. All I know is that out of nowhere, an extremely large dog jumped onto my car and started scratching at the window, seemingly trying to get inside. It scared me half to death because this huge animal came out of nowhere and the white mass was still on the ground. I literally had no forewarning or sense that anything was about to happen. I immediately stopped the car and the thing jumped off and positioned itself, blocking my path, and it stared at me through my front windshield. I then turned on my spotlight in order to see what this thing was, hoping that the light didn't intensify it. What I saw was very confusing. The first thought was that it must be some kind of wild dog that had been feeding off the garbage people leave in the park. But then I noticed that it was standing on 2 legs and not all 4s like a normal dog would do. It stood upright about 6 feet tall, had extremely large muscles, long dark hair like a German shepherd, and its face looked more human than anything else. The eyes were also very human looking, but they seemed to glow an orange color when the lights hit them. The animal seemed to be confused by the lights at first, so then I beeped the horn to see if it would go away, hoping it was just some lost dog or something. But when I started beeping the horn, the thing growled at me. I was so freaked out by this point that I threw the car in reverse, got it turned around as quickly as I could, and I drove away as fast as possible. I have no idea what it was, but the longer I thought about it, it really looked nothing like a dog, even though that was my first instinct. It was more human than anything else. It looked like a werewolf or something out of a movie. I had driven a few miles away. I stopped my vehicle just to think. But then after about 10 minutes passed, I was feeling a bit more relaxed and lucid, so I decided to go back to see if it was still there. I approached slowly, with the spotlight on the whole time, of course. But when I got back to where it happened, the animal was nowhere. That really wasn't all that surprising, actually. But the shocker was that the white pile was gone. I don't know how it got removed from there, and I still don't even like thinking about it. I looked around for about 10 minutes, but there was no sign of anything, not even any drag marks on the ground. Generally, the area is so dark around there that you can't see anything beyond 20 feet or so. I don't know what to think of this, and I've never had anything like this happen before while working in the park. I've seen plenty of animals out here, bears, mountain lions, even a few wild dogs, but nothing like this has ever happened before. The next day I told my coworkers about what happened, and they instantly had very strong ideas about it. Some thought it might be some kind of werewolf or dogman because there are legends about it, local legends, that talk about such things existing here. But the truth is that I'm not sure if I believe in werewolves or dogmen. But then again, after last night, who knows what I believe? Once the intense fear settled down in me, an overall sense of uneasiness and anxiety took over my body, basically 24/7 for about a month. It scared me enough to where I didn't go back on patrol by myself for even months after that. To this day, I'm still not sure what it was, but I do know for sure that it wasn't just some stray dog, animal that's often seen in the park. For that, I am very sure. Dear Lilith, I'm a realtor in Gaylord, Michigan, which I feel is a great place to live. The city has beautiful views of the Great Lakes and Lake Charlevoix. It's also close to both Traverse City and Petoskey, making for easy day trips. If you're looking for some outdoor adventure, a hike through the Gaylord State Forest is a great way to spend a day, which is exactly what I was planning on doing after work. It was June 15th in 2017, and I had just gotten done showing a few houses to clients who lived in southern Michigan. They were basically looking for a great place to raise their kids. The husband recently got transferred to Gaylord, and they loved the town. From my assessment, I could see that they would probably be happy here. So after we looked at their 7th house, their brains were on overload, and we decided to call it a day. I called my husband Rick to see if he was done for the day too. He was, so we made plans to meet at Gaylord State Forest to do a little afternoon hike. It took me about 15 minutes to get there. He got there about 10 minutes later. So we walked our normal loop through the park, starting off on one of our favorite trails, the Woodland Trail. As I look back on it, I remembered that something didn't seem right that day. Something was off. But at the same time, I just pushed those thoughts out of my head since Rick and I were deep in conversation. We walked for about 45 minutes and talked about all sorts of topics, like how Rick's work was going since he recently got a promotion, and what we might do to celebrate my birthday that was coming up in a few weeks. At one point, we stopped and looked at each other as a shrill noise cut through the air, a noise unlike anything either of us had ever heard before. We stood there listening for a few minutes, but when it didn't happen again, we continued on. We eventually ended up close to Lake Charlevoix and stopped at a few picnic benches to have a bite to eat. I opened my day pack and took out an apple. Rick got out his usual trail mix. We made sure to carry out any of our trash, too, since we were very aware of leaving nothing left behind. Eventually, we continued on with our walk, this time heading to the Ridge Trail, which took us through pine trees before reaching a lookout point. There we could see more of Lake Charlevoix below. Everything was still strangely still and quiet, though. Looking back, there were no forest sounds at all at this point, which, knowing what I know now, makes sense. From there, we stopped at the falls for a few minutes, making sure we didn't stay too long since it was getting close to sunset, and it would be easy to get lost in this area of the park after night. We started back towards our cars, talking about how the next time we should just bring some fishing gear because there's also a stream where people catch trout. And right then, we heard the shrill scream again. But just like before, it only happened once, and didn't happen again. Even still, we picked up our pace a bit and continued to head back the way we had come. We crossed a bridge over Meadowbrook Creek that's one of many that connects the parts of the park, and it was now dusk, and Rick stopped and pointed out what he thought might be an eagle's nest high above in the trees. Luckily, I had my zoom lens with me so we could get a closer look, and sure enough, it was an eagle's nest, and Rick spotted one of the eagles perched on top of the tree, looking down at us from its vantage point in the branches. Now, Rick's an avid bird watcher. I never really got that into it, but I do find them interesting. He then also pointed out a black-capped chickadee that was perched on the side of our path. "That one right there, that's the black-capped chickadee," and he went on and on. but I was barely listening after a while. I realized that I was still feeling creeped out by those screams that we heard, and I eventually interrupted him and told him I just wanted to keep moving along back towards the car because I was feeling weird. He was good about it. He agreed to head back with me, so we started off in silence, and then, as we headed back, we began to smell something foul that seemed to be coming from the path ahead of us. I mentioned it to Rick, and he said he smelled it too. Said that he thought it was probably just a skunk, though. But as far as I was concerned, this did not smell like a skunk. It was a really foul odor. I was thinking it might be the carcass of something big, like a deer or even a coyote. Eventually, we made the left turn at the fork in the path, and that's because we had seen the tree that was completely covered in bird poop. That was actually our landmarker that told us that we were close and on the right path that would take us back to our cars. But this is also when I really noticed something wasn't right. I felt a change in the air, and all the birds stopped chirping, and all the movement in the forest stopped, and it got really quiet. Rick also noticed it. It made me think of all the movies where something bad happens to campers or hikers right at this point. And this was all just too weird for me not to be worried. We literally started jogging and reached a clearing in the woods when we heard unusual sounds. Loud, obvious sounds, especially noticeable with all the other silence in the woods. They sounded like huge branches snapping off from trees, or even like trees were being knocked down or pushed over by something coming closer to us. And that's when we saw it. We both saw it. The creature was 8 or 9 feet tall and had mangy fur all over its body. It had the head of a German shepherd or maybe a wolf, but the body of a man. Its eyes glowed yellow, and it was snarling at us with fangs like something out of a horror movie. Had I manifested this thing? I couldn't believe it. I couldn't understand it. What was I seeing? Rick grabbed me, pulled me behind a tree, but it was too late. The creature had seen us and was now coming directly at us, running as fast as a horse would gallop. Luckily, Rick always carries his pistol with him on our walks just for protection, and he fired at the ground in front of the creature. The noise of the gun startled it, which caused it to rear up its head and let out a shrill scream. The exact scream that we had heard earlier, twice. I was now completely frozen in my tracks. I was sure we were about to be attacked. But before I could say or do anything, the thing turned off the path and fled into the woods. Rick and I were speechless. All we could do was look at each other. He finally was able to yell, "Run!" and we both bolted to our cars. We got in his car, sat there for a little bit as neither one of us felt able to drive. We were both blabbering simultaneously, trying to process it, but it was obvious that we both felt that we had been lucky to escape with our lives. I was never a believer of monsters before, but this day changed me. I'll admit it. Now it's been years since this experience happened, but it still haunts me, both when I'm awake and when I'm asleep. I hear Rick dreaming about it too, but I've never brought that up with him because I don't want him to have to think about it when he's awake. I mean, it seems like he doesn't remember his dreams because he doesn't talk to me about them, but I can't be sure. Maybe he's just protecting me. Rick and I still do go hiking, but we haven't been back to Gaylord State Forest since that incident. He always still brings his pistol, and we never go hiking close to dusk or dawn. I've read folklore about the Michigan dogman, and I thought it was all make-believe. That thing, that creature with my own eyes, and experienced it running straight at us, I knew then that there really are true monsters in the world. In my late 20s, I got really into kayaking. I went out and bought my own kayak and even an SUV to haul it so that I could do some nearby weekend trips. When I started dating my boyfriend, I got him into it too, and we started taking longer trips to kayak lakes and rivers. Once we'd done most of the good spots in our area, we started taking road trips to good kayaking areas, particularly around the Finger Lakes and then the Great Lakes. For our 2-week vacation last year, we decided to kayak around Michigan, hitting both Lake Huron and Lake Michigan. It was amazing. The coasts were beautiful and we saw wildlife and the famous Petoskey stones. Sometimes we would follow the little creeks and tributaries that emptied into the lake, just exploring. One day we found a good run of water that ran into a heavily forested area, so we decided to enter it, paddling upstream. It was a small creek, but big enough for our narrow kayaks, and the forest completely surrounded us. We had our cameras ready, hoping to catch something good. We spotted a lot of birds and some deer and smaller mammals, but nothing too crazy. After a while, the creek narrowed even more and the forest closed in, making an arch over us. It was one of the most untouched places we had ever seen, and it was amazing. We had planned on turning back down the coast by now, but we didn't want to miss this amazing opportunity. As we paddled along, I heard noises that were unlike anything I'd ever heard. It was incredibly quiet in there, so you could hear perfectly. The rippling water and our paddles, the occasional bird chirps, but then there was this louder rustling sound. Definitely the sound of a larger animal moving through the brush. As we slid through the water, the sound followed us. The animal was moving in the same direction we were, alongside the creek. I got my camera ready, hoping for something rare like a fox, but the trees were so thick that we couldn't see anything for a long time. We just heard it. Then I finally saw a quick glimpse of it, just the top of the head. I could see thick fur and pointed ears, the hint of what looked like a snout. It looked like a dog or maybe a wolf, definitely too big to be a fox. I still couldn't get a clear look at it, but I'd catch glimpses as we moved along and it continued alongside us. It was definitely creepy that something we couldn't see was following us. We decided to turn around at the same time and realized that we'd have to paddle fast or wouldn't make it back to our campsite before dark. But when we turned around, we found that the current was strong enough that we could put up our paddles and drift back. And that let me hold my camera better. I took a bunch of pictures as we drifted. As we floated back, I was sure that the dog, Wolf, would keep going the other way. But after about 10 minutes, I started to hear the rustling again. I pointed it out to my boyfriend, and we both watched with our cameras ready. Once or twice, I got a picture that included the ears or the tip of its snout sticking out. But I still couldn't tell what it was. I was leaning forward, pretty excited to see it, and I really wanted to get a picture of it, more for the confirmation of it. I decided to try whistling to see if I could get it to come further out of the brush. That didn't really work, not surprisingly. So then I tried tossing pieces of leftover lunch towards the sounds. I had some bits of my sandwich that I thought might entice it. I figured we were safe enough out in our kayaks. The third toss of food did the trick. The rustling stopped, and I saw movement near where the piece had landed. The animal still didn't come out all the way, but we could see more of it. We could see the head pretty clearly, but the body was still in the shadows. Even after seeing more of it, I could still tell that it wasn't a wolf or a large dog, but I wasn't sure. Something about it seemed off. The overall size and the shape of the head just wasn't right. It was only then that it occurred to me that it might be rabid or otherwise sick, and that trying to bring it closer was a bad idea. My boyfriend agreed, and we decided to paddle the rest of the way out and leave the animal alone. We heard the rustling again and knew it was still following us. The isolation and secrecy of this spot wasn't so cool anymore. It started to seem more claustrophobic. Soon we were nearing the end of the creek and would be getting to the lake soon. We could still hear the animal in the bushes along the way, but it wouldn't be able to follow us much longer. The trees ended soon, and there was open beach along the entire coast. As we neared that point, I turned to look back one more time. That's when I clearly saw the pointed ears and the dark grayish fur, and I watched in horror as it stood up, standing right at the edge of the trees, watching us with intensity, standing perfectly up on its two hind legs. It stood just like a human, perfectly balanced in a way that no dog or canine could stand. It was freaky how human-like it looked right then. As I stared at it, transfixed looking at its body, I noticed that the rest of the body didn't look canine at all. The proportions were all wrong, and the shape of its legs were wrong too. It had some hair on its body, but not thick fur that matched the head. It was beautiful in a scary kind of a way. I yelled out to my boyfriend, whose kayak was ahead of me, but by the time he turned, it was gone. Later that night, I pored over the pictures we had taken, looking for proof of what I had seen, but they were just tiny bits of fur or a glimpse of a pointed ear. It could have been anything. After researching for hours on the internet, I realized I had seen a dogman.